Excuse me. So, welcome to Jewish Mysticism Lessons in Tanya, chapter 45. The title of tonight's lesson is Worship Through Compassion. And you should have the handout that we put at each person's seat. For those of you that are watching online, the handout should be linked below. And in the practical Tanya by Rabbi Chaim Miller, the Tanya that we use, we are on page 583. 583. Chapter 45, Worship Through Compassion. And the Alter Rebbe, and today's lesson will be quite a short lesson. It's quite a short chapter. It'll be a long lesson for the length of the chapter, but we should be done within 20-25 minutes. And in chapter 45, as we know, the Alter Rebbe is smack dab in the middle of a conversation about our emotions, right? Particularly our emotional relationship with God. The primary two emotions with which we've been discussing till today have been love and reverence. So, as per the 613 mitzvot that are in the Torah, the 613 commandments, two of them, and in fact one of the six constant mitzvot, meaning two of the six constant mitzvot that we are commanded to do, are love and revere God. There are two verses in the Torah, one which we're all familiar with because it says it's as part of the Shema, right? So we say Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, and then later on we say Ve'ahavta et Hashem Elokecha. You should love your God. One of the questions that we asked very early on is how can we be commanded to have a particular emotion, right? That's like me saying you should love Him. What's if I don't even know, right? With all your heart and all your soul, exactly, which is the continuation of the verse. With all your essence, and there's like lots of different commentary about how deep that love needs to be. So imagine I tell you should love, I don't know, Maseratis, and you happen to love, I don't know, whatever, Teslas. Like, you can't do that to me. So the Alter Rebbe translates that. Lots of commentary talk about it. The Alter Rebbe has been translating that for us over the course of this course, of which we're now in the 5 of 10. Excuse me, so we're just about halfway through. He's been translating that for us to mean that we should do things in our lives to arouse a love for God. And the same is true of reverence or fear, right? We should do things in our lives to arouse a reverence for God. Most primary of which, or most relevant of which, is meditation, right? If you like Teslas and you don't like Maseratis, probably the best thing you can do, right? Nobody can command you to love Maseratis, but probably the best thing that you can do is get educated about Maseratis. Particularly, try to get educated with a bias towards them. So maybe get educated by a Maserati huge fan, or by the Maserati maker himself. They will point out all of the benefits of the Maserati and all these things. And then with enough meditation on that, thinking enough about these things, you can probably get yourself to like Maseratis. Similarly with God, I mean, lahavdil, elef havdalis, obviously it's anthropomorphic, but the commandment, ve'ahavta et Hashem Elokecha, you should love God, your God, or that we should have a reverence for God, is essentially a commandment telling us do things in your life, particularly meditation, particularly learning about God and meditating about God, to arouse within yourself a love and a reverence for God, which obviously affects everything else in our lives. Yes?
Would you say that it's important to have a teacher to guide us in our meditation?
I would say the Torah is a guide to that meditation.
But someone who's more learned than us to help us?
That depends on your level of learning the Torah. If you feel that you could use instruction in learning the Torah, so then yeah, someone can help you with that.
Be arrogant.
In my part, yeah, exactly. It would be arrogant to say that you don't need. First of all, I like to say, I guess I took issue with your word of, do you need a guide for meditation according to the Torah? To me, that seems like a very secular concept. Someone's going to guide you through the meditation, and they're going to tell you this is the way you have to think about it, this is the way you need to do it, etc. We should be people of the Torah, studiers of the Torah, people of the book, as is the name that's so commonly ascribed to us. We should learn more and more Torah. I would recommend particularly Chassidus, just from personal experience. And then that will automatically lead to more fodder, more material with which to meditate. Because the more you learn about God, which is what Torah is all about, and the more you learn about your relationship with God, which is what Torah is all about, and particularly Chassidus, because Chassidus focuses on these philosophical ideas or these intellectual ideas about God. Not that we ever reach an understanding, because we can never fully understand God, but the more we do that, the more that will help us to reach such a meditative state that can actually arouse a love or a fear. This is not to say that without these things you cannot, right? Each and every one of it, and we've been discussing this at length the past 5 weeks, and I know you missed some of those classes, but there are much more basic levels of love, which we've discussed, right? And much more basic levels of reverence, which you can reach by simply tapping into the basic knowledge that God created me, and I'm so thankful that God created me. I'm thankful to God for giving me life. That can also, right? I mean, we're thankful to our parents, even without too much meditation on the fact that, oh, they brought me into the world, and everything they did for me, and they paid for my college, and they paid for my tuition, and they paid for my food, and they paid... You don't have to think about all that. I'm not getting into people who their parents didn't pay for that, right? But like, on a very basic level, everybody could just develop a love for their parents, right? They brought me to this world. All right, that's thank you. That's a pretty good connection. But I'm not going to elaborate on that, and I'll apologize for that in advance because we did talk about this earlier. Let me just look to see if there's a tissue box, but it's fine. Oh, there's one right here, Abraham. Perfect. Thank you. So, excuse me. I apologize. I'm just getting over a cold. It's pretty much gone, but every once in a while it clears up.
Never have got that cold.
I know. It was completely my fault. Yes. To be quite honest. It actually probably was. I chose to go to New York, and I think that's where I got it from, the plane ride and all that.
Because you expected the plane ride has bad air, you got it. If you think there is no bad air, it's always divine air.
You're saying I should learn from Tanya a little bit. Excuse me. So, for those of you that were here last week, this is nothing compared to what it was last week. Anyways, but okay. But this week, the Alter Rebbe takes a turn. The Alter Rebbe says, okay, great. These are two emotions. We've been discussing them at length. And for those of you that were not at the class, I encourage you to visit our YouTube channel and backtrack on some of these classes and to look through the book. Right? You all own the book, and to go back a couple chapters. Since chapter 40, we've been in this conversation. But today, the Alter Rebbe wants to discuss a whole different path towards developing an emotional relationship with God. And even though this is not one of the emotional paths that we're commanded to have, right? One of the emotions that we're commanded to have for God, the Alter Rebbe is going to explain to us why it might be beneficial to have such an emotion. And that emotion is compassion. Hence the title of our lesson today, Worship Through Compassion. The Alter Rebbe opens up by calling this emotion the emotion of Yaakov. And I just want to talk briefly about why that is. So there are 7 emotional attributes, as you're all familiar with. And those 7 emotional attributes are, number 1 is chesed, which is kindness. Number 2 is gevura, which is severity. Number 3 is tiferet, which is beauty, or a combination, like a balance between chesed and gevura. Netzach, hod, yesod, malchut, the feeling of victory. Hod is beauty. Actually, tiferet is more
majesty.
No, malchut is majesty. I don't remember all the English words for all of them. But as you can, different emotional attributes. Now, the emotional attributes are not emotions. That's important to understand. They're more of like a direction. They're more of like a direction. Kindness or loving kindness is not necessarily an emotion. That's not an emotion that we feel. It's a whole category of emotions. Lots of emotions can come from that. One of the emotions, or the primary emotion that comes from that, is love. Avraham, out of our 3 forefathers, Avraham Avinu, Abraham, our forefather, is called in the Torah by God, Avraham Ohavi, Abraham my lover. In other words, that was the relationship that God had with Avraham, was one of love. Why? Because his direction was chesed. Yitzchak, whose category and direction in life was more of a severity or a discipline. Discipline is a better word. Severity is a strong word and usually only negative. Discipline is not necessarily only negative. As we know, discipline can many times be positive. Which was Yitzchak's direction. That was... So therefore his primary emotion for God was reverence. In other words, between the love... Not to say they didn't each have both. Of course they each had both and multiple, multi-tiered relationships with God. But Yitzchak's primary emotion for God was one of reverence or fear or like this trepidation for God. Respect, right? All those words, those emotions. And Yaakov was sort of the ultimate balance between the two of them. So when we say Yaakov is midat hatiferet, that's sort of the balance between loving kindness and severity or discipline. The emotion that comes from that is called rachamim. Rachamim is compassion. When you have a perfect balance between love and reverence, it results in compassion.
Both of them together.
Or when you have the foundation of both of them.
So when you have fear of Hashem, you have love of Hashem, this derives
You don't automatically have compassion. Compassion is a separate emotion, but it's born from those two. It has both ingredients. That make sense?
So they are 50%, 50%.
Possibly. I don't know the exact recipe.
We bring half of
Right.
the love, half of the fear to Hashem, that's called compassion.
I don't know if 50% is the right way to say it. I think a better way of saying it would be whenever it's appropriate. The right one that's appropriate is always used.
Even when we say mitzvah lo ta'aseh,
Someone that uses only love and treats everyone with love is not necessarily always a good person, right? Because that means that they love terrorists. And that means that if given the chance, right, whenever they sit on a jury, always not guilty. No matter if the person's a murderer, rapist,
it's
right?
not compassion.
They have no discipline. They're only love. Compassion is different, right? Compassion is more of a balance. It does involve a little bit of discipline. It does involve a little bit of that take, not just the give. But compassion always gets it right. In other words, at least the way we're using the word compassion here, and I realize that's not necessarily the colloquial term for it, compassion would, or this rachamim would be the balance between the two of them, where you're always using the right one.
Love doesn't mean not rebuking somebody.
It depends on what definition of love. When we say that somebody is strictly chesed, it means never rebuking somebody. In other words, always loving somebody, always giving. That's why sometimes instead of using the word love, we use the word giving, and for gevura we use taking, right? Which is why all tzimtzum comes from gevura. Without gevura, the world wouldn't be able to exist, because it would be only giving.
When somebody has a defect, when you tell him in a good way, you teach him love in the love way that, for example, you have this type of point of defect.
Right.
In that moment, you love that person, you are telling you are doing the wrong way.
You're not just loving them, you're also choosing not to love that part of them. Right? So there's sort of a mixture going on. Anyways. So, here the Alter Rebbe introduces us to this emotion called compassion. And the Alter Rebbe wants to understand right? The word compassion means almost like pity, to pity somebody, to feel for someone, to understand someone, etc. Yes?
You need humility too to be able to.
Absolutely. There needs to be a lot of humility. Correct. It can't be about you, it has to be about the other person. But here we're going to talk actually today, interestingly enough, about compassion for yourself. Now this is very different than feeling sorry for yourself. Feeling sorry for yourself is almost always negative. Right? Feeling sorry for yourself is usually associated with depression. And I'm not going to get into we're not going to... Yeah, victimhood or something like that, right? But which is a conversation for another time, and actually a conversation which we've done most of. Because we discussed depression, for those of you that remember, about 10 chapters ago, in chapter 35, 36. Sorry, way earlier than that, chapter 30 and 31, I believe. My memory is failing me, but I think it was chapter 30 and 31. We definitely discussed depression and the fact that there could even be some positive attributes of depression at the time. We discussed the difference between depression and bitterness. We're just trying to spark people's memories here, etc. 31? Okay. But today, I want to talk a little bit about compassion and compassion for yourself, which is different than feeling sorry for yourself or different than leading down a rabbit hole of depression. What do we mean by compassion for yourself? We mean getting in tune with the fact that yourself is made up of multiple parts, right? So we're all familiar with the fact that we have a nefesh elokit, nefesh bahamit, right? We've discussed that many times. But we're also familiar with the fact that without getting nuanced about our neshama, we have a neshama and we have a guf, we have a body, right? We have a soul and we have a body. And really, if you think about it, certainly if you learn a little bit about it, even this is not just Chassidus, even if you go into the Gemara, if you open the Talmud, when the Talmud discusses the soul, it's a very, very sorry state. In other words, the soul being inside the body, you almost feel bad for it. In the Talmud in Masechet Nida, it talks about when a man and woman are intimate with each other and a baby is going to be conceived. Before that happens, the Talmud takes us up to heaven to talk about what's going on in heaven before a Jewish child is born. Right? So God sends right away. Says he sends for the angel of the souls. It's called the angel of the spirits. I think it's been a while since I learned that Talmud. I think it was like 8 months ago. I had looked it up. And he calls the angel in charge of the spirits, and he says, "I need a neshama." Why? Because there's a couple, and they're going to conceive, and they're going to give birth to a child, and I need a neshama to put inside that child. And when the angel goes and gets that soul, without getting into all the details that the Talmud describes over there, it's a fascinating conversation, and I actually encourage you all to go and look it up. It's not so hard to find. And there's medrash that goes along with that Talmud as well. When the angel goes and gets that neshama, there is like a fight almost. Like the neshama doesn't want to go down, and the angel has to sort of convince the neshama to go down. In one medrash, it talks about how the angel takes the neshama for a tour of the heavens and of heaven and hell to see those that did well and those that did not do well in this world. He takes them for a tour of the entire world to see different people as they are souls inside bodies, and maybe he shows them us, sitting around. And in one beautiful song that I once heard about it, written by a man named A.B. Ruttenberg, he describes how the neshama, and I think it's based on a medrash, he describes how the neshama comes and it's going through the world and it says, "I don't want to go down into this world. Look at these people. They're busy. Look at them. They're busy. This guy's a doctor. This guy's a lawyer. This guy's they're all busy making money a whole day. That's what they're busy with. And once they're done with making money, they go home and they eat. Eat? Who wants to eat? And then they sleep. Half their lives they spend sleeping. A third of their lives they spend sleeping. I'm not interested in this kind of life. I was very happy. I'm in this beautiful heavenly abode. I'm a neshama. I'm a piece of God, right? I'm in this godly sphere. I have no interest in going down below." Until finally the angel reaches like an area of the world, and the neshama sees a tremendous light coming up from that part of the world. And he says, wait, what's that? And he encounters this godly energy which he had never encountered where he hangs out in the heavenly courts. The angel says, "Oh, that? Let's go look." And they go and they look and they see that it's a Jew doing a mitzvah, or a Jew studying Torah. A human being is doing something positive in this world. And the malach, the angel, tells him, this is what happens when you come down a soul inside a body, and you don't get distracted. You do all the physical things. You live as a human being, but you don't get distracted, and you lead a life that's true to Hashem, right? And you still stay connected to God. Then you can reach a much higher level of godliness than you could up here. And before the angel could decide, and before the neshama, the soul, can decide, the angel contracts him into this tiny little putrid drop, and he comes down into the world. 9 months later, he comes out. Whatever, I'm fast forwarding the story. There's a lot that goes on in between. And then he's in exile. And now he has no choice. And it says that the neshama, every single moment that it's inside our bodies, it actually strives not to be inside of our body. And God has to constantly be forcing it to be inside our bodies. Actually, the most famous example given for a soul is Ner Hashem Nishmat Adam, which means that the soul of a person is like a candle of God. In other words, that just as a flame is attached to a candle, right? And a flame is constantly always flickering up. Anybody ever notice that? Mm-hmm. You turn the candle upside down, the flame is always flickering up. Almost as if it wants to jump off of the wick. According to the Rambam, according to Maimonides, according to the Torah, it's explained that it's actually attempting to connect to the source of fire, which is somewhere in heaven, and it's trying to go back to its source. Now, the ironic thing is that should the flame ever be so successful as to actually detach itself from the wick, it wouldn't be a flame anymore. Right? It wouldn't exist. It needs the wick. It needs the candle in order to remain in existence. So similarly, the analogy is true with regards to the neshama. The soul is inside this physical body, but it hates being inside this physical body. And it feels trapped. And it's like, I want to connect to God. And it's constantly, of course, that's why it drives our mitzvot, and that's why this whole thing is designed that way, right? Because it wants to connect to God. But it's constantly striving to leave the body and connect to God. But should it ever leave the body, it would cease to exist. Because it would just become one with godliness, and it wouldn't be anymore the spark of God which is inside this human being. But very often, the term that is used for the feeling that the neshama has while it's inside his body is actually pain. Or exiled. That the neshama, which is really very unlimited and very, godly, etc., is like sort of, it's very spiritual, obviously, and it's sort of forced into this physical and material encasement. Yes.
There is one expression that says, when the baby is born, he's crying. We are happy, we are laughing. When the baby becomes 120 years old, when he is happy living this universe, then we are crying.
Right. And that's part of the reasons given for that, for why babies cry when they come into this world, is because the neshama has been forced into the body. Correct. It's not entirely accurate, but it's for the most part, yes. Yes.
Is this connected in any way to the Ner Tamid?
Not that I'm familiar with.
Okay.
To the best of my knowledge, the Ner Tamid, this is very off topic, but the Ner Tamid, which means the eternal flame. If you ever walk into a synagogue, even if all the lights are off, they'll always have one little. These days they're electronic, but back in the day they used to actually have to light a little candle constantly. Possibly the reason that it's a candle is because of the reference of the soul and that sort of thing. But I think the reason is really mainly out of respect. It's a shul, and therefore there should constantly be light. But off your point, that is the reason for the yard side candle. Why we light candles for the dead. And in Judaism, there's a lot of candles associated with people passing, right? On a yard site, which means the anniversary of a passing, we always light a candle. After a person passes away, for the whole year, we keep a candle lit in the house. All these customs, the connection between a soul and a candle is that.
What is the reason? It's not my opinion, but was a feed. When, for example, a rabbi at the age of 42, something happens to him, he goes to the next world because his soul cannot be elevated in this world anymore, and he's happy he has to live.
So the question you're asking now is very off topic, so I'm going to leave it for a different time. If you'd like, you can approach me after the class. I just want to try to keep to the time schedule. So and finish the chapter, etc. So for now we'll leave it off. And so here now the Alter Rebbe says, if a person can actually meditate on that enough, and I think for the past 10 minutes we've been discussing part of what becomes the meditation, it can actually lead a person to recognize how much compassion we should have for our soul. Right? That our soul is stuck inside our body. And all it wants really is to connect to God. Right? So step one, right? I'm in the handout now, is how compassionate should we feel for our neshama that is trapped in our body? It's a spark of God, right? A spark of God above, but it's locked in a physical body with material desires. It wants nothing to do with the barbecue you're having now, but it has to go along because it's stuck inside his body. That's step one.
But it's always part of God. It never
Correct.
stops.
It's not separate, but it feels very. It feels like it's in a very foreign atmosphere. I'm busy pounding into a steak. I'm busy sleeping my brains off, and the neshama is like, I don't get it. I'm not connecting to God here. You're eating steak. Connect me to God, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe
no option
right. So maybe the word connecting is throwing you off. Help me get into it. Help me be in touch with that. Don't choose the opposite. Don't choose to live in this non-dual reality, or in the dual reality. Keep me in the non-dual reality, right? So that's step one, feeling compassion for the spark that we have inside of us. Step number two, right? So all of that is even the biggest tzaddik in the world, even if somebody's constantly doing mitzvot, but the soul is still stuck inside the body, right? Still in a physical body, still needs to eat and sleep. Step two is to recognize that we might not be so perfect. We might not be so hunky-dory. So the soul is not just stuck inside my body, the soul is stuck living with any negative deeds that I've ever done in my life, because really negative deeds, even though there's such a thing as teshuvah, and repenting, and returning, and transforming from being a negative person earlier, but the soul doesn't forget about any negative deeds that we did. So any negative thought, speech, action, potential for thought, speech, or action that we've had in our lives that have been negative or less than appropriate, the soul has to live with that, which is completely counter to its nature. It is a completely foreign environment. So that's way more compassion that we now feel for the soul. And step number 3 is to recognize that soul is not ours. That soul is a part of God. So that compassion that we feel, which is an emotion now, right? A real emotion that we managed to develop in ourselves for that part of us that's sort of in exile within us. So Hashem, who chooses at every moment to be attached, like you said, right? Because Hashem is always connected. Mm-hmm. So really, and that spark really references and reflects on the whole godly desire. So can we have that sort of feeling for God? Can we have that sort of feeling of compassion for God Himself? Right? Now, compassion. Here's the main point. Here's the main point. Compassion leads quickly to love. Right? Think about it. You feel bad for somebody because they're disabled or they're in a very pitiful situation, whatever it is, right? Very often those situations lead to loving that person or to having a positive feeling towards that person. So that's really what we're aiming for here. So we've managed to get to the result, which the result is basically to recognize that every time we do something negative, there's this God chooses never to detach from us. So therefore God's name, which He rests upon us, is also involved in this action. And we should have a tremendous feeling of compassion for that sort of energy of God or that name of God or spark of God, whatever you want to call it. And that can quickly lead us to having love, which we're going to talk about very soon. Yes, Shimon.
The soul has a purpose on this earth. They have a mission. And that's why they're coming down. So they should appreciate everything that happens here. Isn't that true? Because they're learning, they're growing.
Let me ask you the same question, because you have the same experience in your life, so I'll ask you the same question. People have jobs, right? We all have jobs. And as a result of the job, at the end of the month, a check comes in the mail, right? Or a direct deposit comes into your bank account. Not everybody in this world, I hate to break it to you, maybe you're not aware of this, but not everybody in this world loves their job. Everybody loves the check that comes at the end of the month. Not everybody loves the job. It's very easy to say, yeah, but it's part of the plan. You have to work in order, so therefore you should love the job because it's giving you money and it's supporting you. It's very hard to do that. The neshama struggles the same way, or we struggle the same way. Yes, coming inside this body is the goal, and when we do a mitzvah, it's unbelievable, and that's all worth it, makes it all worth it, etc. But the payal, in actuality, on the ground, when the neshama is not doing a mitzvah, or heaven forfend, if the neshama is occupied somehow in something that's the opposite of a mitzvah, the neshama is in exile, and the neshama feel, and we should have a tremendous compassion for that neshama. We can have a tremendous compassion for that neshama.
I wouldn't, because the neshama's learning. It's the neshama's purpose to constantly learn in this world and to grow. And then when we die, it addresses the things in the next life. It addresses
the fact that this is all part of the plan doesn't make it not painful or counterintuitive for the neshama. It's still in exile.
So the neshama has emotions?
We can have emotions. First of all, the neshama is us, so it definitely has emotions. But also, more importantly, we can have emotions for the neshama. We can feel for the neshama. But yes, the neshama is a living thing that does have emotions.
Okay.
In fact, your emotions come from your neshama.
Okay, I didn't know that.
Yes.
When he said Bechol Levavcha has two bases, Levavcha.
Mm-hmm.
So when God gives a godly soul, He wants that not to push away the animal, so bring it with yourself and say Amen to each of the blessing. Because a person doesn't want to say
That's one
Amen,
interpretation,
his
correct.
animal soul, he doesn't want to say. Hashem does not say to shake the animal soul.
Yes, that is one of the interpretations of why there's two bets in Bechol Levavcha. In section 3, we're going to get a little bit Kabbalistic, but bear with me. I'm going to try to make it as quick as possible and try to bring it right back down to the practical. In Chumash Bereshis, I believe it's in Parshas Vayetze, there's a verse that says, Vayishak Yaakov leRachel, Vayisa et kolo vayifk. And Yaakov kissed Rachel, right? Yaakov was the third of the three forefathers, the one which we're talking about now, because we're talking about his emotion, the type of emotion which he was the first one to develop for God, and the one which we're sort of mimicking, and we're trying to strive to reach that ideal. So his wife was Rachel, and it says that he kissed his wife, and he raised his voice, and he cried. He lifted his voice and he cried.
Out of law.
The Kabbalah explains,
He's out of law.
out of, I would say, probably most
It's
powerful, the
spiritual.
most powerful emotion that's going on here is compassion. So the Kabbalah explains what's going on over here, right? The Torah is not just telling us about a random time, right? Whatever. I mean, without going into the story that happened, there was a reason. It fits into the context over there. But the Kabbalah explains what Yaakov is, what Rachel is, what kissing is, and what crying is. The Kabbalah explains as follows: Yaakov is heavenly compassion. It refers to compassion the way it is from a godly perspective. not compassion that us as human beings can have, but compassion that can be aroused from a godly sense, right? Because as we know, all of our emotional attributes, in fact, all of our attributes, our intellectual and our emotional attributes, what makes up our neshama, are really, we are created b'tzelem Elokim, in the image of God. And this doesn't mean that God has a nose and eyes and ears, but it does mean that God has the same makeup as us. So what to us seems as a nose, or more importantly, what to us are our intellectual and emotional attributes or emotions, right? What to us are actually functional by God are these attributes and these things which are reflected down below. That's why we have these, right? So compassion, Yaakov reflects on a Kabbalistic level, on an energy level. Yaakov reflects heavenly compassion. Rachel is famously known as Knesset Yisrael. She's referred to as the spiritual energy of the Jewish people, of all the children of Israel, all the Jewish people that will live forever. In other words, sort of the beginning of all souls that will come later.
Is that because women are at a higher level than men?
Not necessarily as a woman. This is Rachel specifically. Not all women are the source of all souls. Rachel specifically, this is the way the Kabbalah explains it. I don't know the exact reason why. Yaakov saw Rachel. And when he saw Rachel, he saw the souls of Israel, all the souls that will be throughout time, the way they are exiled within this physical world. And he had compassion for them. As the heavenly compassion, Yaakov, this energy of heavenly compassion, heavenly rachamim, what we're discussing today, he aroused the compassion from the source of compassion. Right? So not just Yaakov, which is heavenly compassion, but from the source of all compassion, which is godly compassion, right? God himself. He managed to arouse a compassion for the souls of the Jewish people. And as a result, he achieved what's called a divine kiss. And one second, how did he do this? By crying out. Through his crying out, he managed to draw down this heavenly compassion on the souls of Israel. And as a result, he managed to achieve what's called a divine kiss. A kiss, the Kabbalah explains, just as a kiss between two human beings, is a very close and intimate connection. How can we experience that close and intimate connection? Or in other words, how can we kiss the divine? How can we have this zivug of nishikin, this connection of kissing with the divine? So that's something you should also, those of you that were here, which is most of you, that were here all the way at the beginning, will probably be familiar with. Torah and mitzvot. Particularly, the deeper we think into Torah, the deeper we meditate in Torah, the more we study Torah, the deeper we can get into Torah, which is, as we've discussed, godly intellect, which is essentially God himself. Why? Because God and his intellect are really one. We managed to reach this level. We were fusing with the divine. We were literally kissing the divine. Mitzvot. Mitzvot are more similar to hugging the divine, particularly tzedakah, which is sort of really the master of all mitzvot, because tzedakah comes from kindness, and all mitzvot are considered good deeds, bringing something good into the world. So tzedakah, when a person gives tzedakah, he's considered as if he's hugging the Almighty. And as a matter of fact, in the Zohar, there's this quote that's brought over all the time, which it says, Chesed droa yemina, that kindness is God's right arm. And he quotes the song, the verse always from Song of Songs, from Shir Hashirim, which is, V'yemino techabkeni, that his right arm hugs me. When a Yid gives tzedakah, God, quote unquote, gives the Jewish person a hug. Now is not the time and place to discuss exactly why tzedakah is such a powerful mitzvah, and why it's the master mitzvah, etc., which has been discussed before. And for those of you that actually joined us around the fire, we once had a class that spoke about, particularly about tzedakah. Some of these things might resonate with you. Hold on, we're almost done the lesson. As soon as the lesson is done, we'll take some questions. So, Yaakov, so the Alter Rebbe is trying to give us some perspective as to how powerful compassion can be, how powerful of an emotion compassion can be. He says, properly aroused, as Yaakov did with Rachel, etc., in that instance, it can actually lead to the deepest connection with the Almighty. Right? What we're calling here a divine kiss, or a divine hug. Torah and mitzvot. And eventually, the Alter Rebbe ends off the chapter by bringing this whole chapter full circle. Eventually, compassion can actually, a deep enough compassion for God, with God, recognizing God's compassion for us, recognizing compassion that we can have for God, or for the peace of God that's within us, etc. And that this whole reflection, this meditation, which we've been discussing at length today, can lead to one of the highest emotions for God. In other words, it can lead to one of the deepest levels of love that a person can have for God. Namely, the Ahava Rabbah, which we've discussed in previous chapters, the great love can be attained. One of the paths to reach it is through compassion, through rachamim, through this meditation which we've discussed. And that brings us back to the mitzvah of V'ahavta et Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavcha, right? B'chol nafshecha, b'chol ma'odecha, to love God with all of your soul, all of your hearts, and all of your souls, and all of your essence, and all of your might. If we want to get there, if we want to get to a stage of Ahava Rabbah, we were actually on this deep, intense level of love for the divine, compassion, or rachamim, can help us get there. And with this, we'll conclude chapter 45 of Jewish Mysticism Lessons in Tanya, Worship Through Compassion.